Hello, welcome to Nondual Christianity. This video is Sin, the Fall, Part 2. I want to focus on the question of good and evil, judging good and evil specifically in this video, and try to unsettle our assumption that we know what is good or bad for us. So in the fall, the Bible very clearly ties this eating the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil with sin, with death, and I would even say with suffering, which is in many ways the essence of sin. We'll talk about that in a different video. So the act of picking up, judging good and evil leads to all these consequences. And as we talked about in part 1, it's because it introduces this state of separation, the belief that I'm separate from the divine essence, and that there's things in the world that are not God that can harm me or that can get me. So therefore, I need to judge so that I can move away from those bad or evil things and move toward good things. The problem is the judgments of good and evil are subjective. Right? Really, it comes down to what do I like or what do I don't. How should the world work according to me? And when things align with that, I call that good. When things do not align with that, I call that bad. Or if it's really, really bad, I call it evil. I'm not going to talk about the question of evil at large in its most extreme examples, like genocide or torturing babies or whatever your mind might jump to, other than to simply say, one, only the divine essence exists. And anything that's occurring must be within the divine being and consciousness, as we've talked about in the What is God and Where is God videos. And the second is, God can't be absent. The divine essence cannot somehow be absent from some portion of creation, as we've also talked about, especially with the immanence and being videos. So the focus here is more on judging evil in our day-to-day lives, right? I got fired from my job. I had a car accident. I'm now required to work late. So-and-so said something mean to me. They don't like me. Whatever things are occurring that we tell ourselves the story, we have this reaction of that should not be happening, right? It should not be happening because it's bad. It's evil. So one, those are subjective judgments. The second thing is we have such a limited time perspective that often we make these judgments about something that is good or bad for us or something we like or don't like. But we, looking back, perhaps years later, would change our mind. So if we get fired from our job, for example, you might say, oh, well, that's evil. That's bad. But if we got a new job that paid more or was better hours, we might look back and say, oh, well, that's good. And yet, from what time perspective are we making that judgment? And I think the point is, instead of trying to judge something as good or bad, evil, that we simply change our perspective and accept whatever is in existence, that is reality in this moment. So in this moment, this is happening to me. In this moment, this is what exists. And that we stop fighting against what exists and we simply accept this is here right now. Now, how do I want to respond to it? Instead of spending our energy trying to fight against what is, because we judge it as evil, because we feel like there's this separation. We tell ourselves a story, right? As we've said, stories cause suffering. And the other piece of that is if we can accept what is, then we have a much better way to respond to it. Much more effectively because we're responding not from confusion as from our deeper essence. And then the final thing I'd like to note is, not only do we have these time perspectives, but we also can look at children and we can say, okay, well, let's say my 2-year-old wants to eat candy for each of her meals. We would say, well, that's not good for her. Well, from her standpoint, that's what she wants. That's what she likes. And it's evil to say no. From a parent's standpoint, it's good to say no because we know that that's not healthy. And yet, at what point in time would we claim that we have somehow graduated out of that mentality of a child, where we now know for sure what's good for us? Right? We kind of assume that at some point we now know what's good for us, but we've always assumed that. As a 2-year-old, we assumed we knew what was good for us. And now at whatever age we are, we still assume that we know what's good for us. And the question would be, when did that transition happen? You see, if you can look back at your 2-year-old self and say, what I thought was good was actually not, and vice versa, why would your current self have a better judgment, right? And I could encourage you to ponder that a bit. When did that transition happen? How would you know if that transition happened? Because it would seem in this biblical story that the very act of picking up this fruit of knowing, judging good and evil is the start of suffering. It's the start of all of these things that create confusion in our lives. And when we don't pick up that fruit, when we don't judge good and evil, and we simply accept what exists and then decide how we want to respond to that, then we're responding from a source of our divine essence instead of responding from this state of separation and confusion. Thank you for exploring this idea with me today.